Right, so here we are back again in the sequence or the second video where MY, hi MY.
Hello.
Having conversations with MY about his path of integration. Specifically, we are talking about his connection to Ifa, a system of divination that is used, that comes from the Yoruba people. And please don't quote me if I'm saying this wrong, because I'm not an expert in any of this, although I come from Cuba, and in Cuba, we definitely have a lot of different practitioners, or a lot of practitioners of Ifa, and we know them as Babalaos. Is that how you know the high priestess of Ifa, MY?
Well, there's a tier that you have in part of your journey. You're getting initiated into different, you can be initiated into different orishas, and then I mean, for lack of a better term, tier, Babalao, and then even after that, there are titles that they're higher than, I guess, quote, quote, higher, where you're designated a certain responsibility, tier of responsibility within a family of Ifa practice. So it goes even higher at some point. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to differentiate that, at least the little that I know about Ifa coming from Cuba, um, someone who is, initiated into Ifa becomes a Babalao. I like to call them high priest, in which now they have the tools to divinate, and they have to go through a very strict process of learning how to use these tools. I think the practice of Ifa in Cuba is a lot different than Africa, and I believe in different parts of Africa, because Ifa, to me, what I've learned, and based on the um, investigations that I've done, uh, means it's a system of divination that was used, thousands of years ago by the people, and these people were chosen at a very young age and were prepared to do what was necessary to go through that, initiation. So I believe that it came from generation after generation of a lineage of people who were designed or chosen to work with this divination tool, that later, due to the economic challenges of the time, was used as a practice and then a religion. So the religion of Ifa in Cuba, I've noticed that it's a lot different than some areas of Africa. And one of them, for example, is that women cannot be babalaos, or they don't gain the same status of a high priest. And I'm talking about Cuba.
Okay. Okay.
It's different. You can have Iyanifas, which is the name given to high priestess in Africa, that are pretty much, same status as a babalao. In Cuba, you don't have Iyanifas. You can help and serve the Baba, either by marriage or, chosen by the, the Baba, or I would say the divination, or Orula, right? Or Orumila or Orura, that chooses, if the person comes with that path, that she's to take care of a Baba. So there is this slight variations of how it's practiced from one place to the next. And I think we need to, make that distinction, that your experiences in Ifa, in that path of Ifa, who was part of your path of integration, was very different than maybe the path of other babas or other high priestess, whatever you want to call them. Because there is definitely variations within the different houses.
Right, right. And so, and I don't know, I haven't studied enough that deeply to understand how it all works, but as far as, you know, Iyanifa, I mean, remember, you can be initiated into a particular, you can be a priest of Ogun, you can be a priest of, you know, a priestess of Oshun, you could be a priest of Shango. And my understanding is that those particular priests of those particular, they have their own divination methodology. So even Iyanifa, they have access to their own divination processes as well. That is, from my understanding, limited as it is. So yeah, I mean, as far as that is concerned, you know, I would have to defer to other people who have studied. Remember that traditionally back in Nigeria or Benin, wherever, and just on a side note, there are other systems too, right? I mean, we're talking about voodoo, right? Voodoo, as what people know. Conceptually, there's a misunderstanding in the West how that works and all that stuff. But there are many different systems. But conceptually, you know, you can kind of say that they're indigenous to many ways, and the kids that grow up in that area, they are, you know, the ones that are picked, they learn from, they're exposed to it. That's part of the culture, right? If you're growing up in Ogun State or you're in this Ifa family and around the community there, you're learning from a very young age. Teaching
That's
you.
how it was in my country as well. Yes.
Yeah.
And that it's good to clarify that, just because, you know, as we're making these videos and talking about, you know, our experiences, we're not really claiming to say that we're speaking for all the, you know, high priestesses and, you know, out there, or babalaos, and implying that, you know, they're all the same. We're just basically sharing our experiences of what it was like to integrate that aspect of our lineage, our ancestral lineage, of our spirituality and our growth, because this is all, again, an aspect of who we are that is helping us now understand that, yes, we're, everything that we've done and everything that we're doing, it's integrating a knowledge that is part of our genetic code, our DNA. And that path, you know, we have experiences that sometimes are positive and sometimes are not. But it's what has brought us to the present moment to recognize all that we recognize and understand now. So our intentions here are not to diminish the practice or the system itself, is just to share what it was like and some of the implications that we found in that path, where it's a system that is quite complicated in itself, but a lot of times the complication gets to another level because of the practitioners themselves are not either honest or sincere enough in their practice. And, you know, a lot of this idea, how you said in the last video, you know, you were trying to find a connection to God, and what you were missing, it was self-empowerment. That self-empowerment to you at that moment came through a system where to you was ideal and the perfect system to help you feel good about yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot of power definitely in that system. I mean, just in the things you do, you know.
Exactly. So here you begin this journey where you want to be more powerful for whatever reasons, you know, you felt at that moment. And, you know, the self-empowerment became something maybe distorted in some way to the initial thought or the initial desire. And, this is something that we all do, how, in the search for peace, love, kindness, which are things that now feel that are important to you. And that
Right.
woman became something else and something very distorted.
Right. And that's only something after discernment now where I was at back then, right? While you're in the mix of it, you don't really know what you're doing. You're experiencing that you have an impact through what you're doing using these tools, at least for me, using Ifa tools. But what you're not understanding is that the impact that you have. And in retrospect, when you're talking about different frequencies and vibrations, there is definitely now for me, looking back then, working with different, not quite so high vibe archetypes and energies, potentially, right? Especially with your intent, right? You can get stuck in it. You can get stuck in it, especially when you're learning. You're using energies associated with blood sacrifices. You're using energies associated to just making certain offerings of food or whatever. You change the vibration from your intent. But when you're stuck in that and you're thinking, okay, this is power, this is empowerment, and you don't know that there's a different way of doing it, you can get stuck and it can become distorted. And that was a hard lesson for me, because at some point, while I was going through my journey and really, through the awakening that I had, it was like, oh wow, I was deep in doing some vibrational stuff that was deep. And the other aspect of it, and it kind of turns back to, people that are exposed to this when they're young, they learn how to navigate those vibrational energies, whereas the methodology and the tools I learned, I may have learned how to get to the end point, but I didn't necessarily learn how to protect myself and or the people around me that were being exposed to this energy. I didn't necessarily learn how to protect them. And did I have the knowledge base? Nor did the person that told me or instructed me on how to do it have the knowledge base. And that's where the limitation is that you are limited in what you're exposed to based upon what you are given. So I would say that I was definitely at a disadvantage, because I wasn't making trips to Nigeria or Benin or wherever parts of the country that said, hey, here we are, these Babas that have all these tools. You're limited to what they give you. And that's where it kind of becomes potentially, you're at the mercy of these Babas and what they're giving you, right? Because they understand that they have this knowledge, and they'll give you pieces of it as long as you are, giving them money and or you're going there and bringing in other people to feed off of that. So, and that's just one aspect of it, the practice. It's not a denigration of the system. It's more of an observation of the limitations of the practice by the individual. So
economic system, because again, our belief systems are intertwined with our culture and the structure of our economic system. So if you live in a place, because this also relates to the situation with Cuba, where to me it was very interesting how, when I went last time to visit, here is a country where people are struggling to put food on the table, but yet you pass through houses where they supply the animals that are needed for, sacrifices in ceremony. And those houses are filled with dead animals laying on the ground waiting to be bought. So you see these contradictions that you kind of begin to ask yourself questions of what's going on. How is it possible that people don't have enough food to eat, the average person, but yet you see these houses where they have, I mean, this happened to me where I saw it. So, you know, you come to understand that at some point we tend to, our belief systems are, you know, they blend together. They're affected by the economy of the country that we live in.
Yep.
The mentality that we have about, you know, what our economy is about, or what our, you know, the needs to survive are. And that's the reason why I said in the beginning, you know, to me, I, you know, through my investigations, I got to that point that I understood that Ifa is a divination system that is very old, just like in Greek mythology, we had the Oracle of Delphi. And there are many other different systems, as you said, that exist. But when did it begin to turn into a religion or a cult?
Or structure of control.
Exactly.
Okay.
Manipulation, where now it was more about, well, I mean, I remember in Cuba, especially with the slavery and the conflict between, you know, colonization and slavery, where, you know, it began by, well, if you want to belong to our practice, you know, you need to have a code because we don't want to be exposed to the opposition. So there was something about that where, you know, the Africans or the slaves, they used to, you know, have their own ceremonies, but to keep out, you know, the wrong people, you know, you had to know the code, or you had to know, you know, how to, you know, come in and give a clue that you were not going to expose them. Now, so what it began as a form of survival, turning to this whole system of manipulation and control, that now it was about money, and it was about something more, because the development of this particular oracle in today's society, as we look at the history of how it developed, it became about control and manipulation. And in Cuba, for example, I'm using that because, you know, it's where I come from. One of the things that I heard this high priest talk about, which I agree with him completely, was how is it that a system that was used to help a person in their evolution, in the spiritual evolution, became about how to do some sort of juju to manipulate somebody to keep the husband or keep the or keep the girlfriend. I mean, it is true. So, you know, even amongst the, you know, the practitioners, they have come to see that something that was so powerful and so beautiful has become this system of manipulation that is not really what it was meant to be. But going back to you, MY. So
And just to piggyback on that, I mean, I've had conversations with Babalaos that pretty much said the same thing. You know, that said, yeah, well, the root of it is supposed to be a system, and I would even say that hopefully the intent of Ifa was that it was a spiritual system and not divination, even though it's strong in divination. I think at somewhere the translation may have been lost. I don't know Ifa that well enough to be able to do that, but my understanding of universal spiritual practice is that it seems like the root of it is to be able to make that connection with God, or, you know, with a Rumila or Olodumare. You know, I mean, we all have these different terminologies that represent that energy. So at some point, you know, the practice became more important than the intent of the system. So at least that's been my experience. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was, I think it probably was, a particular practice, or maybe not so much a practice. It was a way of life of how to help people to feel more connected to God, how to prepare people in their journey as, from a physical perspective of how to, overcome difficulties in their lives. I think, it's very similar to some of the systems that were used by indigenous people today,
Mhm.
where you have the medicine woman or the medicine man, the shaman of the tribe or the people that are there to help whoever, is the newborn in this journey of life, right? Which is a journey that sometimes has highs and lows. And I feel like most likely this particular system was done the same purpose. But anyway, so coming back to you in particular, MY. So here you finally you start following, and it's interesting because this is something that we were talking of the video, and it's about the um, let's see, how do I say this? Some of the commitments, let's put it that way, some of the commitments that you have to make along the way as you begin this path, something, because I can relate to this. I was never initiated in Ifa, even though I was told that it was part of my path. I was also told that I was supposed to become a santera, which is another practice that is used in Cuba, where it's blend of, Yoruba practices with Catholicism, and never did either. But
Mhm.
the interesting thing is that when I worked with some of these Babas, because I've worked with different ones at different times in my life, so there is a commitment. So you begin creating this connection with the priest, or, the priestess, where that priestess sort of prepares you in the way they know how to get you more connected to the ideals that are used based on what that person knows, because we know that are many different houses where, you get initiated to, that represents these different systems. As you said, there are different kinds. Um, And this person sort of makes you make a vow of loyalty, of loyalty, that, whatever they teach you,
Hmm.
have to comply, because they're sort of the law. They represent the law. To me, I had someone who said to me, "I'm your God." And we're exposing this because, again, it's not to point a finger that everybody who's in this practice is bad, but how the bad apples tend to give a bad reputation to a system that is great. And we all have experiences with those bad apples. In my case, I had someone who said, "Hey, whatever I tell you, you have to do. And if you don't do, I'm your God. And for that reason, I will punish you."
Right, right.
What do you have to say about that? How was that for you?
Well, I had a very similar experience, and yeah, back then it was me voluntarily doing that, which is, my bad on my part. But my experience with it was, um, so I had an opportunity to go to Benin, Africa, in which basically me and my travel partners, one of them was going to be given a title to be an Oba, right? An Oba of this or an Oba of that back in the United States, so on and so forth. And within the tier of the Oba means king. structure, you have different tiers of titles that operate to that particular Oba. So the title that was given to me was Balogun, which is basically, in terms of conceptual, is pretty much a protector of the king, right? Spiritual things that physical. Say that again.
Say the name again of the title.
Balogun. Balogun.
Balogun. Okay.
Yeah, Balogun.
Okay.
And of course, in hindsight, retrospect, and you know, dare I say this, having conversations with Babalaos about this, the titles of that nature are not given, and they're given, but they're not valid.
But they're not, say that again.
They're given, but they're not necessarily valid, because those kinds of titles are inherited in the tradition. My understanding of it and what was told to me. So for all intents and purposes, whatever a piece of paper says, you go there, whatever ritual you go through, you go there. But when you're given a title of a particular situation, you know, and you're coming back that hey, you're Oba this or Oba that, my understanding is that the people that are giving it back over in Africa, they know that it's just a piece of paper. Okay. So my motivation at the time was out of this was there's ego being fed into that as well. But then at the same time, I went there with true intent to say, you know what, is this Baba that's going to get this title worth my protection? Because at that time, when it happened, you know, I'd already gone through law enforcement, and you know, physically I had lived the life of a protector. And then spiritually, I took that, at that time, obligation
How many years later, after the beginning point, you are now finding yourself needing to be the protector to this person who you don't, it seems that you don't know?
Yeah, I really didn't know. It was just a trust thing.
So about how long?
It was not my first Baba. It was my second Baba, because at that time I'd had, you know, for whatever reasons, we'd had a falling out with the first Baba, because there was no more communication.
And you were not initiated yet, or you were already
being? I was initiated at that point in time.
So you said in the prior video that after 15 years of knowing your Sifu, which was your martial art teacher, became also your spiritual teacher who guided you into Ifa. So 15 years. Now, after 15 years, you had a fallout with that person. Mm-hmm. You had connected to another Baba.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And now this Baba is telling you that you have to go back to Nigeria is it the same place of Ogun?
No, it was Benin. It was Benin.
Benin. Okay. So you have to go to Benin because you are going to be given a title, which it puts you in a place of needing to protect a high priest that you don't know who he is.
Right.
But a high priest that had a status, correct? Certain status.
Well, yeah. Well, he was given a status, a king title, right? And like I said, underneath that tier, their support system of Babas that are given other titles and obligations. So, and you know, valid energies or not, or titles given or not, I still at that time when I went there to Benin, still literally was in ritual, you know, with sacrifices and all that stuff. There's still when you make an energetic obligation, kneeling down and saying, I'm going to protect this person, so on and so forth. I gave that my own personal power and obligation energetically to that person. And thank goodness that, years later it's all done and over with. But and that's another story. But I gave that. And I was doing afterwards, I was showing some other stuff, how to do this, how to do that, and was doing stuff that was, number one, protecting him because he asked me to, or just doing stuff that, yeah, I was there was. I mean, I don't want to get too much into it, but I was, low vibe things in terms, and that was from my intent. I mean, I was sacrificing animals to do these things that were just not I would never do again. And as a matter of fact, my journey now is like my personal feeling is that there's a lot of energy associated to animal sacrifices, but I would never do that again. Never ever do that again. I mean, there's
Well,
now knowing what I know now, but back then it was
listening to your story to judge you, we understand the process that sometimes is interesting to how for us to be able to find that connection to God.
yeah.
We have
And
to
really,
this path where it's instead of taking us closer to God, it takes us as far away from God.
well, in my personal experience, and knowing what I know now, yeah, it was working with that dark side of that. And the thing is that in retrospect, it was that journey that put me to the understanding of where I needed to be now in my relationship with God. Remember, the root of this is that has always been, from my youth, has been how do or my search for God. And yeah, there's free will involved with things and all of that stuff throughout all of my journey. But, in retrospect, looking back at it, I had to experience that darker aspect of it to understand and have gratitude for my journey to where I'm at now. And that's beautiful in of its own self.
Some of us have to, and I feel like this is an understanding that goes beyond sometimes. Well, what I mean to say is at different levels. So sometimes some of us, I feel like there are some of us that are here in this journey of integration where we really have to go deep into darkness to come back to the light. And maybe in that process, it doesn't feel good, especially when we realize that we had to go that deep. But ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, what I've learned to see is that it gave me so much information of understanding different levels of darkness. And at some point we kind of have to all bring it together. I mean, if we for a moment are able to observe and talk about this experience without judgment, we start realizing that all we've done is made a decision to choose a path where that path teaches us a lot of different things that are, ultimately signs of different frequencies, different vibrations that from a broader perspective become like, all the colors of gray between two extremes.
Yeah.
That's if you can get away from judgment and, all of these things that we tend to do to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's how, my journey to God, I had to go and eat dirt so that I can figure out that I didn't actually have to, because God didn't want me to eat dirt. but I did it anyway. It's kind of ironic in some ways, and I'm not trying to please in any way diminish your experience, because I've
Oh,
endured quite a
well,
bit, but that's how what we do. So
yes.
so it's interesting how something that began about self-empowerment, and this is such a beautiful story, because again, there are so many of us out there that are doing the same thing. We are looking to self-empower ourselves, the wisdom to self-empower ourselves. But sometimes, in order to find that sort of path that is more direct to ourselves, we have to incorporate all kinds of situations
Right.
that it actually takes the power away. And in this particular case, here you are taking a vow of protecting somebody where you're totally giving your power away, not to God, but to another human being.
Right. Right. So, and you know, that's the thing. You look back at it and you look at the terminology of what's called spiritual awakening, right? We all have this journey where we're trying to find ourselves. We go through all these karmic challenges and we realize that in gaining power back, and you know, the term power might be in gaining our own sovereign understanding back, we have to experience all these different levels of challenges, right? Um, and and the awakening happens when you get slammed in the face with, hey, you know, I'm doing these animal sacrifices to generate power to protect this person, or I'm doing these animal sacrifices to do this or to do that. But that is duality ego based, for me in retrospect. And that's not where true understanding is. And it took that journey for me to understand. And at some point, when the universe says, okay, slap in the face, I'm going to take all this away from you because you need to understand where you've been so that you can look forward to understanding where your next part of your evolution is. And it's part of the beautiful journey. At least that's, you know, we all have that. And at some point we have, I shouldn't say all, but I'm just saying that seems to me, my understanding now, it seems like that's part of our journey.
Yeah.
You know, and we all have that. And you mentioned it too. It says there's no judgment in, you know, someone having a different path or this path, but we're all climbing. And I like to use this analogy, is that we're all climbing to the same mountaintop at some point. We're just taking different paths to get there. Some of us take longer than others, but that's our journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one could even argue in the context of spiritual awakenings that you know, we formulate that journey before we reincarnate each time we come here. So anyway, back to, but
So,
that, yeah,
well,
that's,
my question, no, it's okay, it's all good. So my question is, when did you get what got you to that point? Because there's always a turning point.
mm-hmm.
You know, we all have that turning point where, you know, we sort of hit a wall. And it's not that we haven't been in front of that wall many times before, but
Sure.
we get to a point where all of a sudden we are realizing that we're hitting a freaking wall,
Yep.
and the wall is not coming down unless you change and shift your perception and do something else. So for you, MY, when was that point that you realized that, oh my goodness, what I
So
thought
I'll make it.
that would be, it isn't?
I'll
And I'm
make the
sure that
story
it
short.
didn't happen, excuse me one second, and I'm sure it didn't happen all at once. I'm sure it happened in bits and pieces. Or well, maybe not, maybe I'm wrong. You tell us.
So what I thought was the wall in retrospect now was in revelations later, like you said, it wasn't all at once. What I thought initially was the wall was when the falling out of the second Baba happened, and then the beginning of my own personal family relationships started to falter. And I thought that was when the wall hit, because but in retrospect, the wall really hit. And this is where the beauty of my journey with Ifa really, really kind of came. The wall started to happen really when I was initiated with Ifa. Because and this is, I'm sorry, what was that?
How so?
So that was the beginning of when my my falling out happened with my Sifu, my first Baba. Remember, I had been with this person and the circle of martial arts family, circle associated, and his family, everything, for 20 plus years, right? Ifa practice, 20 plus years with this person. And when I had the falling out that I had with them, that's when I went to the second Baba. And then I had to experience what I had with that journey. And then that's when the continued falling apart of that second Baba, and then the beginning and the falling out of my family structure. But really, and that's when at some point I realized, wait a minute, okay. And that's where my spiritual awakening started to happen, was that trying to navigate the family relationships with me started to happen. But through my journey, my spiritual awakening, if I were to say at that moment of my family relations, was probably about 3 years ago. But really, that portion of the wall starting to build up before I finally hit it happened when I was initiated into Ifa. And that's where I say Ifa that was the beautiful part of that revelation, was like, that's when it all started happening. So, and that was a progression of understanding for me. Does that answer your question?
So what I'm hearing here is that once you are in this journey of becoming more having a deeper connection with Ifa, you begin to have problems with your teachers.
Yes.
So one, there was an issue there, which I think I would really like for you to talk about exactly what these issues were, and we'll probably do it in the next video, because we're trying to give these videos at 45 minutes so that we don't put people to sleep. But I think in the next video, I would like for you to talk about what some of these conflicts that took place. Especially, here you're being asked to promote this level of loyalty and faithfulness to the person who's guiding you in this path. And now all of a sudden, which I'm sure it wasn't suddenly, you begin to have issues with that person, and then you go to the next person, and eventually the same thing happens.
Right.
And then that leads into you having also challenges in your own personal life with your spouse. And it kind of all sort of started to come together to, a degree of I would say, of intensity.
Right.
That led into this sort of falling apart, or maybe hitting that wall that you're like, wait a minute. And in that process, you realize, oh my God, this was all started with me, coming together or entering the path of Ifa. Is that pretty much what you were?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My awakening happened energetically while I was trying to navigate through the challenges with my family relations at the time. But like you said, after this journey of 3 years, the revelation, looking back at it, was starting around the time that I was initiated with Ifa. Yeah, yeah,
Ooh,
quite interesting.
okay.
You know, which
So,
in some ways, you know, validates Ifa at its root in the connection with Olodumare and or God and or universe. Um, you know, there's a validity with that connection to some degree, you know, and I'm just blessed to have realized it and not go too far down the rabbit hole of the practice of it that you know that would have led me astray from where I'm at now. So yes.
you know, that the one image that comes to me is that sometimes in order for us to gain the stability in a frequency, we have to sort of go backwards to things that are unwanted. And that one last time going back is what creates the momentum to push you forward into the abyss. So when you're saying, you know, Ifa was kind of the beginning of self-empowerment, but it wasn't a direct road or a direct path. You had to go into these crevices of energy that were totally the opposite, but they were all sort of creating a momentum that finally brought you to that threshold of having the awakening. It's like, I call it 10 coconuts fall on your head and hit you, and you're like, oh wait.
For me, it took 20 coconuts, but yes.
Well, as many coconuts you need to have, but you got it. And it doesn't happen all at once sometimes, because, you know, a lot of times people have this idea that an awakening is supposed to be this life-changing moment where you get this illumination of being divine and everything from there is perfect, and it's not.
No, it's a constant healing, constant revelations,
Right.
and each step that you make, right? It's not even when you have that revelation, the challenges of the
It's just
stuff
the
that brought
beginning.
you there keeps
It's
coming
just
back. Yeah.
it's just the beginning of another cycle, and it's a cycle of, to me, an awakening after awakening is just a cycle of being more self-aware of what you're doing and the implications of your choices. And
Mhm.
this is the beginning. So let's just leave it there and let's jump into a third.
Part 3 coming up.
Yay! All right. So we'll see you in the next video.
Bye.
Bye.